What's up, YouTube? Wraithyn here, back with another how-to video to get you good at Smite. This time we're going to be headed back into the mid lane with mages in general, and we're mostly going to be talking about build theory here. This guide will likely be useful for you the entire time you play Smite and is intended to get you to a point where you can be self-sufficient at building in and out of conquest for seasons to come. We're going to get right into the good stuff, but before we do, be sure to like and subscribe, turn on notifications if you want more how-to content. And definitely leave a comment and let me know which class I should do next. With that, it's time to learn how to build mages. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about is the start. With Season 8 kicking in, there's a plethora of good options in the starter items section, but that generally leads to confusion on which direction to go. I'm not going to get into the items specifically because they're likely to change in the future, but the general rule of thumb is if you need clear or want to play aggressively, buy a starter that helps with clear. If you're a god that does well spamming abilities, get the item that gives you CDR. And if you're a god that's very immobile, pick a starter that can help you survive. Try to think of what your god does well and which of the starter upgrade options play into that when you're making your selection. Again, you can pick and choose what you want, but they're currently still working on the balance for the mage starters now, so some will be stronger than others. This is just a good place to start. Next up is what you do with all that extra gold after you buy the starter. And the answer here is you're going to buy the tier 1 of the item you will buy after you finish your boots. We'll get into what that should be here in a second, but the biggest part of what I'm trying to say is do not ever buy tier 1 boots after your starter item. Tier 1 boots have no power on them. It's just movement speed, meaning your abilities do less damage, your basic attacks do less damage, and you're going to lose all mid lane pressure regardless of what god you pick. As for what potions to buy with that 100 to 150 gold that you have left, you typically have enough for 1 to 3 potions after you buy the starter and tier 1 item. I typically go for whatever I'm not getting from the starter item and my god's kit. If I have a heal like on Ra, I'll go 2 mana, 1 health because I can heal myself up if I need to. If I have lots of mana sustain on my starter, I may go 2 health and 1 mana. This one you'll have to feel out based on how you like to play the different gods. As for relics, it's almost always beads and aegis. Typically you're going to go beads first, but if there's not much CC between the support, jungle, and mid, that mid 3v3 that you're going to be tangling with in the mid game, you could consider going aegis first. This is a lot of preference here, and it depends a lot on what gods are picked on the enemy team. I typically just go beads first as a personal preference. All right, next up is your boots choice. This one takes a little bit of planning to figure out, but the general rule of thumb here is unless something drastically changes with how boots are built, you buy Shoes of the Magi when you have a max power ability that is meant to one-shot in the late game, meaning you should only have to use 1 rotation of abilities to end a fight. Think Ra, Scylla, Thoth, or when you plan on building a lot of CDR in the rest of your build and don't need it early. Let's say I was going to pick up a Chronos Pendant. I don't need all that extra cooldown on my boots. Shoes of Focus, on the other hand, are good for gods that do exceptionally well with cooldown very early. And if you want to push your advantage in clear and poke by spamming abilities, think like Giannis and Discordia. All right, after boots, we get into the slot 1 build, which is actually one of the most crucial decisions you're going to make, as it's going to dictate how the rest of your build plays out. Remember, we're going to be finishing the item that we started at the beginning of the game. Don't start building into something else. Slot 1 is generally reserved for a high power or flat penetration item, and here's why. Early in the game, squishies and tanks have very little protections, both from items and from the natural protections that you get over time as you level up. This means that power is super effective. Most of the damage that you shell out is making it through to the health bar, which is why it's so valuable early in the game before those prots come online. Also, flat penetration like Spirit Desolation is huge. Not only are you getting a ton of power off of items like this, you're also getting flat pen, which negates the protections that the squishies and tanks get early and makes the power that's on the item even more effective over a longer period of time. Your first item should really be a raw power or flat pen item, especially if you need early anti-heal against the other team. All right, next up we have the second slot. So we've already got our starter, boots, and first item, and this is where you're gonna start seeing decisions being made about what to build. Generally speaking, you're gonna be looking for the most effective damage that you can buy for the least amount of gold possible. These are really stat efficient items. Most of this is going to be dictated by the first item that you build. If it was a Bancrofts, you're likely going to get a Typhons here, as the passive synergize and give you more overall power. Similarly, I can do a Soul Gem, which synergizes with the CDR, power, and flat pen of a Spirit Desolation Rush, and makes the damage burst from Soul Gem's passive even more effective. This is also another slot where you can shove more flat pen like a Magus, but double flat pen isn't really the best build path right now. That said, if you built a raw power first item like Doom Orb, Bancrofts, or Chronos Pendant, this is where I put my flat pen like the Spirit Desolation or Divine Ruin. All right, on to the third full item slot. We're almost there, I swear. And this is where you start really making decisions and have lots of options. Should I get defense? Should I get a breastplate if it's physicals that are diving me? Should I get a mantle if it's a guardian and a jungler together? Don't be afraid to pick up defense in this slot. You should already do plenty of damage, but none of that matters if you're dead. The next thing to consider is how tanky are the tanks? Do they have lots of physical protections, lots of magical protections? You're going to really have to pay attention to builds here, but generally speaking, you're either going to want to go for an expensive luxury or utility item with loads of power and a great passive, or percent penetration. Percent penetration, especially in this slot, is kind of criminally underbuilt at all levels of play, and unless your job is to hit a massive ult on the carries with Ra or Thoth or someone like that, you're going to need to make sure your damage is effective on tanks. Items like Rada Tahuti are great in this slot because they do a bit of both. It has tons of power and 10% penetration, which isn't a lot, but it is going to make you more effective against those tanks. That said, if you feel like you're not doing damage, you should think about running an Obsidian Shard or a Karen's Coin to make sure you're having an impact. This is especially true if you are behind. If you are down a significant amount of levels on the other team and you're more even with the enemy support, you should absolutely run a 20% pen item in this slot. All right, this gets us to our last slot, which is basically going to follow the same rules as the third slot. Are the tanks tanky? Do I have enough pen? If I went straight power in the third item slot, I'm generally going to want that pen now. As a quick note, outside of Conquest, this really does not apply for other game modes. In Arena, Clash, and Assault, the tanks get way more levels in gold faster than Conquest, meaning you need percent pen in your build much earlier, like the second item after you finish your boots. Remember to watch their builds and understand whether or not you're effectively doing damage. Again, this last item slot can flex too. Everything from defense, more power, more pen are all valid, but you need to take a look at what your role is in these team fights and what situations unfold. Ask yourself, do you need a ton of power and item passives like a Soul Reaver to turn and burn the jungler that dives you? Do you need power and item passives to one-shot the enemy backline with your big ult? Do you need that anti-heal that you skipped earlier in the game and now the Afro is out of control and you should have had it 5 items ago? I'm guilty of this one too, but this is where I would throw that divine. Do you need percent pen because the only enemies you're able to actually reach with your abilities are tanks, and there's Heartward amulets making the carries tankier? These are all things that you have to think about as the game unfolds. The worst thing that you could do when it comes to building in Smite is get this one build only mindset and use cookie cutter builds from websites that only really last for so long until the meta changes. And most of them aren't applicable for every game. These standardized builds, which I give to people myself, are a good place to start for somebody who doesn't know how to build, but we're trying to get you to that next step. This is also going to prepare you for when the item metas shift, new items and passives are added, and you're going to be much more equipped to know what to build and when. One last warning and a good thing to think about is, don't get addicted to CDR.
Fuck you, whore!
Typically, late game fights should be over by the time you hit one of each ability on most mages, so having 8 billion % cooldown isn't always the best. CDR is actually most useful for newer players who tend to miss a lot of abilities because it means you end up having more chances to hit things. Keep this in mind as you get better. At the time of recording this, the typical build path is going to be a starter item, followed by your boots, followed by Spirit Desolation, Soul Gem, Rada Tahuti, and Obsidian Shard. You can see that falls exactly in line with what I explained earlier. Well, guys, that's it for me on this How to Build Mages guide. Let me know in the comments what you think and if this build philosophy works for you. Hopefully this helps you understand what to build and when, and helps you elevate your gameplay. Definitely hit me up on Discord or Twitter. I've got links in the description if you use this and it works for you. My favorite thing ever are the YouTube comments, the Discord messages, and the Twitter ats where you guys are using what I'm teaching you and it's having an impact on how much fun you're having playing Smite. It absolutely makes my day. All right, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.
Titan, nice! Let's fucking go!
Holy shit, dude.